digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined by a whole host of interesting folk. Starting out with Trip from the Silicon Valley Comic Con. We have with us a long-time established narrative writer for the games industry, Rob Yescombe. We also have with us James Spencer from the BBC's Blue Room, which he will explain exactly what that is. We also have Andrew Draithwaite joining us from We Are VR. And James is back from the ESL. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Wonderful. If you would like to just explain a little bit more about who you are and what you do, we'll start with you, James, because you've been with us before. So just give us a small reminder exactly what you do with the ESL.
I am the co-managing director for the UK subsidiary of ESL. And we have 15 subsidiaries across the world. Our HQ is in Cologne, in Germany.
Now, for those of us those of our audience who aren't aware of what ESL means, or indeed what esports is, would you care to explain to them exactly what the ESL does, or what Turtle Entertainment does, for that matter?
Absolutely. Esports, for the uneducated, is... well, it is now.
Uninformed rather than uneducated, I would have gone with, but okay.
Esports is competitive gaming, and it really is the culmination of people watching people playing other games competitively in tournaments. So we run tournaments across the world of all different scales and all different games, and then we stream those online, mainly using the platforms such as Twitch, and that gets a lot of viewership.
Okay. So, thank you very much for that one. Trip, would you care to explain to us exactly what you do with the Silicon Valley Comic Con?
Yes, my name is Trip Hunter. I'm the CEO of Silicon Valley Comic Con. Last year was our first year, and it was born out of an idea between Steve Wozniak, who is a part of the company, and Stan Lee, obviously the founder of Marvel Comics, to create a Comic Con that is about the intersection of technology and pop culture. And so that's kind of our genesis. Last year was our first year. We're based in San Jose in California.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about this Blue Room, Spencer?
Hi, yeah. My name's Spencer Marsden. I'm a technology demonstrator at the BBC's Blue Room, which is a facility where we've got latest consumer tech like VR and 360 stuff, and we make it available to staff so they can have a go at it, make their own minds out about it. And different departments are playing around with stuff, so they can come and see what else is out there and what works and what doesn't work, and learn from actually getting hands-on, getting dirty sort of thing.
Okay, so basically you get to play with toys all day.
You could look at it that way.
Okay. And Rob, why don't you tell us more about what you've been doing in the games industry, and certainly tell us about Farpoint as well.
Sure. My name is Rob Yescombe. I've been working as a writer and narrative director in games for about 11 years. Right now, I am the writer of a game called Farpoint, which is being developed by a new studio called Impulse Gear in San Francisco, which is it's a PSVR exclusive, which was just announced at E3. It's the very first game to use the PlayStation VR aim controller, which, for anyone who doesn't know, it means that you hold a physical controller which has, in our case, the same dimensions as the virtual gun you see inside the virtual world in this shooter, which is, I'm biased, of course, but it's amazing to be able to lift the gun physically for real and aim down virtual sights, which makes it completely unlike any other project I've tried in VR. That game, Farpoint, is a very unnerving space adventure, which is set on this hostile alien world that you crash land on this strange planet, and your only hope of survival, your only hope of escape is to figure out what happened to the rest of your crew. I'm also currently the writer and narrative director on what I'm sorry to say is still a top secret virtual reality project that I'm making with Tequila Works in Madrid, who are the guys who made a couple of games called Deadlight and Rhyme. So for the first time in my career, everything I'm doing right now is in VR.
Wow. Okay, so you're fully immersed at this point.
I am.
Wonderful.
Up to the eyes.
Up to the eyes. Well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was the future of both cultural and social immersion. Now, from my perspective, what I want to do is really continue the conversation with you, James, about this idea of what it's going to look like in the future when we talk about social immersion and collaborative immersion, whether that is through VR or AR or MR or whatever version of R you want to call it. I'm interested to hear from you what you think that future is going to look like, or what you think is going to be the thing that's going to lead from where you are at the moment with these physical gatherings and these digital observations into this kind of hybrid of a mixed reality?
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Our audience are watching almost purely digital content, and they are attending large events. Up to 110,000 people will come together to watch a big screen of digital content. So while they're there, they're watching the games being played. Obviously, there's the physical element of the players playing on stage, but I think the real opportunity is how the content they're consuming is far more in depth. And I think that's where AR and VR will really find its place in what we're doing. And we're really excited about how that will happen. We have no idea how it will happen. We aren't VR experts, obviously, but we're really excited about talking about that and discovering ways in which we can harness the technology to do so.
So, Rob, I'm interested to hear from you then on this, because one of the words that's being used an awful lot at the moment is this idea of immersive entertainment versus necessarily virtual entertainment or virtual reality. We're talking about immersive, and I'm interested to hear from your perspective, since you're kind of eyeball deep in it, so to speak, whether or not you feel that there is this transitionary understanding of what immersive entertainment should be, or how this is going to look in terms of how people are going to engage with that, whether it's to collaboratively experience something or whether it is to have that insular virtual experience.
Well, I think if you're talking about esports, there's almost there's a split here, which is AR, VR, whatever, is it going to be about changing the kinds of things that the players are playing, or is it about the way the audiences experience the current content? I mean, esports is already in fantastic shape. It doesn't really need anybody's help. But one of the things that stands between it and the so-called mainstream, quote unquote, is that the mainstream doesn't really respect the intellectual prowess of e-athletes as much as it respects the physical prowess of athletes in other sports. It's still a core problem in spite of how big esports already is. So by, for instance, using VR, I mean, this is you're looking a long way into the future, but by using VR to bring in the player's instance a physical aspect into what they're doing, it becomes an asset in taking esports to a less initiated audience. But in terms of how an audience can consume it, there's a lot to be said simply. Okay, so for instance, when I first was recruited onto Farpoint, which was the VR project I was just mentioning, they showed me and you often see this when you start a game, there'll be a PowerPoint presentation that says, this is a breakdown of what we think the content of the game is. It's this much action, this much exploration, this much narrative, this much that. And they described it as a shooter, but when they showed me the breakdown, it was something like, and this may not necessarily be true for the game now, but this was what it was then. It was something like 80% exploration, 20% combat. And I was like, you guys are crazy. No one wants to play a shooter that's 80% exploration. And then I went inside. And for anybody who doesn't know, the simple act of observation inside VR is completely transformative. And that's the thing, is being able to, even something as simple as like, I mean, you've seen this already where like, I forget the name of the company, but they rent out courtside seats for the NBA and you put a VR camera there and you can feel that you're on the front row. That kind of experience, even with the existing format of esports, is completely transformative to the audience. So it may not be about, doing a complete overhaul about how things are experienced. Just that simple shift changes it completely.
What I find interesting about what you're saying here as well, though, is this idea of this cultural perception that there is only prowess involved when it's physical, when it's a physical sport of some sort, in which case it's worthy from a mainstream perspective of being observed. And I kind of wonder, Trip, whether or not you've run into the same kind of barrier, in as much as with Comic Cons, I think traditionally the perception has always been culturally it's a little bit of a that thing that they put to the side because people don't really necessarily want to be acknowledged as a nerd or a geek or, a fan of whatever. And yet, when we have the physicality of a Comic-Con and people physically coming together, there is that sentiment that actually, in this moment in time, it really doesn't matter. It's about the connections that people have when they get in the room together, and that idea that they just want to be able to experience their love for whatever that thing is together. Whether or not you think the kind of limitations that the esports is having is necessarily one that will apply to Comic-Cons, and therefore, do you see there being a point in the future where Comic-Cons are not necessarily something that somebody turns up to? They just, go in and experience in virtual reality or immersive reality.
Well, it's a great question, but my initial answer would probably be, I hope not. Right? To be the end of Comic-Cons. But I think one of the things that helps us is because we have such an emphasis on technology, and it's not, if you go to a technology trade show, your technology has to work because you're trying to impress people. At what we're doing, we don't care if the technology isn't perfect. We don't care if the technology has glitches in it, because the people that are coming to our event are not only there because, they want to be dressed up and participate in cosplay. They're there because they're the people who are writing the programs and work in technology. I mean, we're in the heart of Silicon Valley. So we have this ability to have companies come in with technology that they might not know how they want to apply, or they might want to take a risk and say, how can we create, not only how do we demonstrate our technology, but how do we demonstrate it in a way that is entertaining? And so we have the ability to have kind of both sides of the equation, which is a wonderful luxury for us. So I don't think, in our instance, I think the people are coming because they want to understand the technology as much as they want to participate in it.
Okay. So as somebody who's showcasing technology every day, Spencer, I'm curious what your take on that is then, in terms of the notion that people need to be able to get physical with the experience, but that the experience doesn't necessarily have to work per se, but they can understand where it's going, where it's headed. And I think Rob was kind of, speaking about that a little bit, in as much as once you get into the virtual reality space to explore, it really is transformation. It changes your perception. Yeah. And I expect that you see a lot of that kind of thing in the Blue Room.
Yeah, we have a phenomenon we call VR face.
Yes.
Which is the look that people get as they take the headset off. And I like to say, welcome back to reality, where the infinite bit depth and the non-player characters have got more of a backstory. Just to sort of ease them back into it all.
Oh.
And every now and then we have a little chat about whether this is actual reality or not. Yeah, that can generally mess up someone's lunchtime.
But do you think that there is this notion that actually it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be working, but if we can at least see where it's headed, that we can begin to pluck down these ideas and connect them to things?
Yeah, but I would say with virtual reality, throughout the different systems, it's got to work. If you start experiencing nausea or anything that breaks the immersion, then we have a wide range of people trying it out here, from software engineers who can't wait to get it on, to maybe project managers who don't want to have another load of workload come in, so to speak. So we find that for the tougher customers, so to speak, VR is winning through. The connection that you make with, say, controllers on an HTC Vive, for example, that moment of trust that's gained when you reach for a thing and it's actually there. The fact that VR has the physical and the virtual, really in sync and trustworthy and like a tool rather than a toy. I think it's very compelling, and a lot of people walk away kind of enthused that they've seen something that technology can have that amount of kind of effect on them. Yeah, there's been some quite interesting interactions with it.
I'm interested to hear from your perspective, Andrew, because I think you've got a twofold observation to be able to make here. The first is in terms of your contributions with We Are VR, but also in terms of the research that Dubbit does and the fact that you're working with young people and able to see how they're engaging with this technology and what their expectations are of this technology. I'm curious to understand from you whether or not you think that there is, this softening, if you like, to the attitudes around what the expectations are for new and emerging technology, and people wanting to be able to connect those dots and have a little bit more of a blue sky approach to things, because certainly the younger generation are very much more flexible these days about where they expect to see content and how they expect to be able to interact with devices.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we've looked a lot at kids using Oculus Rift, in the development kit 2 days. And they all came to it so intuitively, they picked it up and they found it so natural. And then moving forward to devices such as the HTC Vive, it's so easy for them just to pick up the controls and trust them straight away and start interacting with things. And I think it really is natural for them and enjoyable. The big question is obviously, we don't know what's going to happen in the future in terms of what age ranges we can go into virtual reality. There's quite sort of broad. I think it's 13 plus on most devices, and there's still a lot of research to be done, which W are looking into doing actually at this moment in time, just to make sure everyone knows. We all know virtual reality is great and it's going to be the next medium, but everyone wants to be sure that it's safe and that they can trust it. And I'm sure once this research has been done, it'll answer a lot of those questions.
So in our little bubble, as we are in technology and in VR, I am curious though, Andrew, from your perspective, whether or not you see this future, this kind of social future for immersive entertainment and immersive devices such as a VR headset. Because when you talk about the research that you've done with young people, obviously one of the aspects of VR that really hasn't been explored in a huge amount of depth at this stage is this idea of collaborative environments. And sure, we've got people like, VR Time and, those kind of environments where you are able to collaboratively hold conversations with other people, but it's not necessarily a person that you're seeing. It might be a slightly animated mushroom or
it's never quite the same, is it?
Strange blob of some sort. And yet I think the elasticity of the young minds is very accepting of this notion of, I can sit in a room full of objects and I can be in a room full of people, and they don't have a real problem with that. I'm curious, what you've seen so far in that aspect in terms of that idea of presence for young people in social environments.
Yeah, I mean, safety is always an issue, or the first thought when you think of sort of social environments for young people. But I think there's 4 or 5 out there at the moment. I think you mentioned one, V-Time, and there's also Altspace and Converge, and they're proving to be really popular. People are using it already. These social platforms. Google actually did some interesting research recently, and kind of proposed the idea that all you need to, because I know you talked about how people shown in virtual reality, whether it's an avatar, whether it's a creation, and they actually found that just the head and the hands was enough to kind of feel that social interaction. So yeah, I strongly believe that obviously social will be key in virtual reality. I think that's obvious just by seeing the Facebook purchase of Oculus. I think they believe so too, and it's just getting the people in there that I think is going to be the issue. Getting people using the headsets. Well, I remember first trying out a multiplayer game which kind of had a social element to it. It's called Hover Junkers, and the issue for us all there was that there wasn't that many people playing the game or in the experience. So that will be the barrier, I think, and then I think it will be very much avatar based in these sort of social environments.
Okay.
I think it will be avatar based, not just by needs of practicality, but also in the case of V-Time, it's like going to a Halloween party. There's something about a little bit of anonymity, a safe amount of anonymity breeds a kind of social bravery. And it harks back to the days. I remember the very first time I used the internet and used a Yahoo chat room.
Oh boy.
It blew my mind.
Yeah.
That you could have those social barriers were down, but you were just anonymous enough that you could sort of feel like you could be yourself. I think that's one of the fantastic things about V-Time, is that you just feel just the right kind of safety, just the right kind of anonymity.
But is that necessarily a good thing in this kind of modern social era that we're in, where we're seeing people literally jumping on the first available cause to criticize or issue that they want to kind of pile in on afterwards? That is that necessarily a good thing to have that degree of anonymity?
Well, I don't think that's the end state of it. You even see it with something as simple as YouTube comments now that you see real name. But I think in the first instance, because the experience right now, for instance, in V-Time, reminds me of going back to early chat rooms is that everybody was so happy and excited to be there. Like that kind of weird, internet psychosis that happens on bigger platforms. It's not going to happen for a while. Not here, because everyone's so happy to just be part of it.
That's quite interesting.
I think it's even like, the first time you download a new map pack on Call of Duty, like the first 2 hours where everyone's figuring out what the map is a sort of almost like a sort of collaborative thing before you kind of get to war. I think that in time that will change, and that specificity of personality of who you are is going to be very important. Also, partly for a different kind of presence and a different kind of, for instance, a more professional communication setting. But right now, we are at the genesis. This is like when cinema was a train coming towards the screen. Like we're at that point. So I don't think we need to jump on making people subscribe to those rules. Not yet.
Okay.
We have a major problem with that anonymity, with mainly around females within esports.
Yes.
And I would say that as well as gaming. And our problem is obviously that they get a lot of abuse from this aspect of being on the internet. And we went to the extent of setting up an organisation called anykey.org, which is about diversity in gaming and esports, just to try and encourage females to really find it more comfortable to be within that community. And I'm just wondering, this is fascinating. I'm wondering whether the idea of having an avatar and in a social environment within a VR space would actually help prevent this problem, because you can almost shun those people. You can sort of turn your back to them. Whereas on a chat list, you can't do that. It's there and it's stuck, and you can't ignore it. And I'd be fascinated to see if there was any. I've not actually tried Converge or VTime or anything like that before. And imagine a situation where you can literally shun people in a virtual space to make them irrelevant to the conversation if they're actually, giving feedback which isn't welcome in the community.
The thing I would question about this as well, and again, I'm going to go back to Andrew on this, is I'm curious to understand whether or not there is a sentiment about whether or not having gender-neutral avatars or gender-neutral presence in virtual reality might be the way forward. If this were the case, if we're following on from what both Rob and James are saying, would it be, something that we would suggest is perhaps the way forwards, is to not have this issue around gender by merely removing that from the avatar in the first place?
Yeah, it's obviously a sad state of affairs that we have to do that anyway. But I wasn't aware that there was that this was happening, and it does happen in esports. But yeah, it's a sort of natural compromise, I guess, that you would just make them gender neutral, and that would eradicate any issues, I guess. But the other sort of examples I've seen of sort of, because obviously you get to the point where you create your avatar yourself and you can make it however you want. Yeah, there's the aspects of where the other way people go with it, but I think it's possibly the only solution if that is the case.
I would have to weigh in on that and say I think that by eliminating gender seems like a huge step backwards to me. If we can't address that issue and overcome something that shouldn't be an issue at all, ignoring it is rarely the way to fix it.
So if we're not going to address it in that way with neutrality in gender, I'm curious then, in terms of what types of guidance or what types of protection you think might be a good starting point for this kind of situation or scenario where there is this kind of large social gathering. And it almost harks back to the very beginning of the I feel old now, the first days of internet chat rooms and people, needing to have moderators, and have people be able to tell them, this is the etiquette and this is the way it works. And, if you can't behave to these rules, we'll boot you, and, all those kind of things. Do we think that there needs to be some governance and guidance in the way that people should be, behaving in these environments? I open that to the floor.
With Anykey, what we've done is written kind of a list of, and actually I should start with saying who's involved with Anykey. It's collaboration not just with ESL, but with Intel and also MIT and Blizzard and a few other women in the industry that are heavily involved in looking at this area. And one thing they've done is they've done a huge amount of research for a start at the events and also online. And then they started writing some guidelines in order to help stop this sort of activity, especially sexist activity. And one of the main things they suggest is, providing moral guidance and almost name and shaming people in order to remove the popularity, if you like, of trolling is obviously what we call it, and to try and quash it out in that way. And then also, having a kind of if there is someone who has got a celebrity status, they would become a mentor or a sponsor of a female in the industry, and sort of say, well, that's the right thing to do. We've also created tournaments specifically for female teams. Now, I think this is a stopgap because we need to kind of nurture females to become good enough to hold their, it takes practice to be able to hold themselves in a major tournament, and ultimately we'll be looking for mixed teams. But I think it will naturally get quashed out. But I'm really interested in how VR would help that. And I can see there's actually more hope potentially in doing that.
Well, one of the most powerful experiences in VR is the first time, even an artificial character, the first time the character looks you in the eye. There's something really meaningful about that. I think to James's point about being shunned, I mean, so much of online anonymity is the idea that eyes are not on you, but the feeling of someone looking at you and knowing those are someone's real eyes in a virtual sense, I think would be interesting to see the impact that would have on that kind of behavior.
I'd agree with that. I'd say that the VR experience is less abstract than the two-dimensional, words on the screen thing. So maybe that people would bring more kind of responsibility and respect into it, because any to be ignored or to be somehow or otherwise kind of
excluded.
Excluded in such an amazing immersive environment would be maybe too high a price to pay.
But this leads me to an interesting question, in as much as, when we look at cultures like Korea or Japan, where gaming is very much the thing, and being in these environments and being part of these cultures and communities is very important. And we also look at that young people are finding themselves more and more attached to the importance and the value of their social presence and their social identity in terms of social media. Is there a risk, is there a danger here that it's going to cause some conflict and some issues for young people as they try to adapt and try to learn about this new set of avatar rules, if you like, or this new etiquette that they need to conform to? And as much as, we're still at the early stages of young people even understanding the full scope of what it means from a social media perspective and the impact that social media has on their long-term, lives and careers. Do you feel that that's something that needs to be considered as well, Andrew?
Yeah, I think definitely. You've got to cater for all cases, really. But this sort of avatar style isn't going to work for every single culture. You've got to think about these things. But I guess the culture out in Japan and certainly the gaming culture over there is much more independent and much more sort of less social, I guess. And I think that the kind of creating these social spaces and having people go into them, and I know we talked a bit about sort of punishments and sort of shunning, but you've got to look at on the flip side of that is that you sort of, there's the element of trolling that then begins that could happen in these social environments, and there's actually going back to Google's sort of research they've done on this recently, they did mention the kind of ways to stop it, but again, the avatar thing, I think it will work, and I think that certainly just the hands in the face will work just fine.
Okay, so
Spencer, if I just may add to Spencer said that the experience is less abstract, and obviously this is all speculative, but I thought that was a really interesting point, that as those barriers that isolate the gaming experience come down, do people become more honest because they have less to hide behind? It's an interesting, question.
Well, not all online negativity is enabled through anonymity. I mean, there are plenty of lunatics who are happy to just be themselves as lunatics. It's sort of a two-stage problem. I do think that, the humanizing aspect of being inside VR is definitely helpful in dealing with the people who need that anonymity in order to act in an improper way. But there certainly is a problem with regular, honest lunatics.
Okay,
Twas ever thus, though, wasn't it?
I think there are some things that simply, are not going to change overnight. We as human beings tend to like to tribe up and gather in certain types of tribes and certain types of behaviors. And I don't think that just because virtual reality has come along that's going to change necessarily overnight. But it is interesting to me because one of the things that Rob's mentioned earlier about, we're at this really early stage with VR, and you talked about the steam engine coming at you in black and white. And that's one of those things that actually, if you've had the misfortune of attending anything that I speak at, I always talk about this notion that virtual reality is at this really early genesis. Film has, somewhere in the region of about 100 years to get from that train engine all the way through to Avatar. And the games industry had a good chunk of time to get from Pong through to The Last of Us. And with the virtual reality industry, there is this kind of, be it right or be it wrong, there is this assumption somehow that in the span of 30 years, which is roughly how long it's been around from a commercial perspective, that we're going to get to the same kind of distance and quality of understanding and learning that the games industry and the film industry have had, at least 100 years to get to. So I wonder, Rob, from your perspective, whether or not you do think that there is perhaps a little bit too much of a weighty expectation on just how mature virtual reality should be or could be at this very early stage.
Mature in what sense?
In terms of understanding the nuances of subgenre, of methodology, of technique, of framing and questioning the way that things are put together. I just think
here's the big differentiator between all other media and VR. Is that everybody knows that a movie is 2 hours and someone learns something about themselves. That's a movie. And that is such an ingrained part of our psychology that almost all Western fiction subscribes to that structure, which is a hero's journey or something to that effect, a main character's single arc from beginning to end, and they have some kind of self-revelation at the end. And along the way, characters and events show up to help them exact that change. But that's not how life works. The way that life works is that right now, in the story of Tanya Laird, I am a supporting character. But in the story of Rob Yescombe, you are a supporting character. And right now, the person walking behind your window in your house is a background character in the story of Rob and Tanya. But we are background characters in the story of that person. And that is the structure of narrative in real life. And the amazing thing about virtual reality is that it is virtually reality. And right now, you see it all the time. Lots of people trying to make VR films or make VR games. They're subscribing to the old way of how narrative exists. And all of those things, books, TV, films, you name it, games, everything, they're trying to distill the human experience into a consumable medium. Whereas virtual reality, you can, if you do the proper planning, reflect the narrative structure of real life. And that is completely transformative because no other media has been able to do that before. So how mature should VR be at this point? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that we have to go through the stage that you see now. Everybody has to try, hey, what if we try and make it a film? Okay, that works, but it doesn't really embrace what the medium is good at. Or try and make it like a game. And okay, that's good. It's a good game, but is that really what VR is about? And it reminds me of when we talk about cinema, how that's grown over the last century. Is, once upon a time it was the train coming at the screen and people running out the cinema. But then, whatever it was, 40 years later, along comes Citizen Kane. And then they said, hey, well, what if in this conversation we put the camera here, here, and here? And that became the visual format of narrative in movies. And we still use that same format today. It's going to take a while for us to figure out what is the best way to tell a story in VR. There'll be lots of stories that are good inside VR in that time, but it'll be a while before we arrive on the true format of narrative. And I mean, at this point, I'm kind of throwing my hat in the ring, saying I think it's about reflecting the structure of life is the way to tell stories in VR.
Okay.
I think it's also, sorry to jump, it's important to note that people often compare VR to kind of films or games, but it's a completely new medium that it's everything is going to be different in VR. You mentioned 2-hour sort of films, and there's no sort of limit to how you can take it. They're all completely different experiences, and I think that's one thing that's really important to note.
Okay, but we've focused an awful lot on VR, but the original question at hand was about the future of cultural and social immersion. And I kind of want to redirect this back to you, Trip, in terms of where you see this heading in the future, in as much as, be it with technology or not, the future of these social gatherings and this idea of the cultural phenomenon of immersion, be that an alternate reality immersion or just, a suspension of disbelief immersion that ideally, Comic-Con fans and Comic-Con goers love to engage with. Do you see that there is an evolution of that occurring, whether that is with technology or not?
I absolutely do. I think what was interesting for our event was we initially, and because it was the first year, we made a lot of mistakes. And at first we said we're a technology event. What does that mean? We don't really want an enterprise server company showing up at our Comic-Con. And it wasn't until we put a stake in the ground around VR as the technology that we wanted to highlight that all of the attention started to happen with companies that were involved in that area. And as people lined up, so we had a big VR zone, and as people lined up for that VR zone, I was walking the line saying, "Is this the first time you've ever put a headset on?" And the majority of those people said yes. And I said, "What do you expect to see?" And the majority of them said, "I have no idea." They had an expectation that might have been set. You're going to, transformative is a word you hear over and over again. But it was very interesting. The ability of this to attract people without any expectation or a very low expectation of what it might be is extraordinary. And I don't recall any recent technology where there has been that much attention for something the majority of people have yet to experience. So how is it going to transform what we do? I'm not sure. I think it's limitless. I really do. Whether our event can, we sold out this first year and we're now expanding into 4 or 5 other locations. But how can we expand if we begin to think about what VR can do for us? I don't know how that changes the experience. To your point earlier, Tanya, a lot of these people come together because being together is the driver of the event, right?
Yes.
And to show off what they've done. So I don't think this will ever go away, but I think we'll begin to see more aspects of VR coming in to change how people interact.
Okay. James, from your perspective, do you see a future where technology or cultural or technological shifts are going to impact the way that people engage with esports, whether that's the fact that it becomes the norm to participate from your own home, or whether that is that there will continue to be these huge physical events that people are gathering at? What do you see being that big shift that's going to change the way that you're doing business?
That's a great question, and I think that's probably the most exciting opportunity in my perspective. That people, obviously the vast majority of our audience is already at home in their bedrooms watching esports. To actually get them out of the bedrooms, like I've said before, is not an easy task. You have to really give them an amazing experience. A lot of Comic Cons around the world, ESL usually choose that event as a pop culture event as an event of choice to run esports tournaments, because that community, as Trip was saying, are really interested and eager to get their hands on new experiences, on new I don't know, popular culture. So I think from our perspective, and leading on to what Rob said earlier, which really interested me, was the fact he was talking about observation is something that is probably we've not thought enough about, and that experience in VR. And I think this is when it will start really changing. And that's just got me thinking, just during this this call right now. I wonder if at home, sitting at home, they're in front of their screens, they're watching Twitch. If they were to have the headset, obviously we've thought about 360 cameras in the venue, and we've thought about how they jump into game and they can sort of observe while walking around in game. No one's really done that yet, so we don't know. We've not trialed that with our audience yet. And I'm just wondering, what will that content look like in order to entice that audience to put on their headset rather than just look at their screen? And I think there's probably some really nice ideas emerging. Again, I wish I was the VR expert, because, I really do see that it will make a big impact, especially as games become more VR and AR related, and then also obviously consuming general media and experiences within that. So I wouldn't say if, I'd say yes, it 100% will happen, and we would look at taking advantage of that for sure.
Okay. So Spencer, I'm curious to hear from you, in as much as we've talked a lot about what the technological or the cultural shift will be, and there's been a lot of talk around VR, but I'm curious to hear from you about any other alternative technologies or trends that you're seeing emerging within the Blue Room that you think might also have impact.
Well, I think it's alternate uses of VR, actually, just to stay with VR. We're here talking about gaming and people interacting via games, but I think that the potential, as probably everyone knows, is huge. It's the conversations we've been having. People come in and say, "Yeah, I can play games with it," but what else could this be used for? Training is the one that comes up most. For example, if you're training to be a paramedic and you get in the back of an ambulance and you can see where all the different dressings and treatments are, so you can get your muscle memory. So it's that kind of connection between data and physicality. Even things like organising people's, as Humdrum was organising people's diary and scheduling and logistics to be able to look at data in a three-dimensional way. I think that's a key thing, and I think that will push VR, and not, it's about the normalising of it. So people seeing it not just for young adults who are naturally more experimental, but for seeing it coming into the workplace more, seeing it in hospitals more, seeing it in therapeutic uses of it, or training uses, and I think that will drive it a lot. We're primarily here. We're storytellers, so we use whatever technology suits telling the story. We're exploring different things. We've got stuff out on our BBC Taster site at the moment. In 360 as well as VR. So we're seeing if there's an appetite for it, and basically with technology, sometimes technology pulls the audience and sometimes the audience pulls the technology. So we put it out there, see if there's an appetite for it. There will be, because everyone likes to be in a different reality. That's what books are for.
Well, VR has an interesting challenge ahead of it, because it's very hard to, people talk about it all the time, but there is a line in the sand between people who've been in and people who haven't been in. And it's almost like, it's a strange analogy, but it's like going to war. You either know or you don't. And there's two things here. One is convincing people to go in when they don't know what it is. Trying to advertise a 360-degree medium on a two-dimensional screen is a very difficult thing to do. But the other thing this reminds me of to what you're talking about is, I remember the Wii had kind of a little bump in the road, which was that the Wii opened up gaming to a whole bunch of new players, because there was such a low barrier for entry. You just had to be you, and that was it. But there came a point where a chunk of the audience were under the impression that Wii Sports, which came with the Wii, was the Wii. They didn't know there were other games. And I think VR has that problem times 10, because not only are you trying to convince people that this is a thing they should get into, but also to understand that its applications are so wide and so powerful. I don't know how we get around that problem, but it says a lot that all the major platforms are putting so much effort into road trips, doing tours of countries and saying, hey, get hands on with it in a shopping center. Because it's the only way that people can understand the impact that this thing can have.
Yeah. It tends to be until somebody's put something on their head, they really don't necessarily understand what everybody's babbling about, to be fair. But I do want to kind of follow on from what was just being said there by Spencer. And just in terms of one of the things that we haven't really mentioned or haven't really talked about is actually in the context of VR, this notion, and I'm going to also pick up on a little bit of what you were saying, Rob, about this kind of going to war scenario. And the fact that we haven't really had much discussion around what the long-term impacts of having this technology and this medium in society and culture will necessarily have. And, one of the things that we speak a lot about at some of the events that we speak at is this idea that, give it 5 or 10 years and there will be a whole new category of counsellors who are treating people for PTSD, for experiences that they've had in VR or, some form of mixed reality. Because the memories that you're creating when you experience things in a virtual environment are created in a slightly different way than one might normally experience them. And I'm sure, James, that you've had this experience with gamers who, when they're playing a game, when they're in these environments, they really do remember these things as if it happened to themselves. And so it's interesting to maybe think about what will those future, culture and necessary services be as a result of having these technologies in our lives. And I'm curious, Andrew, to hear from you what you think these will be, given the work that you're doing with Dubbit. Do you see any potential emerging trends further down the line that you think will have that kind of cultural impact or that technological impact?
I think it's interesting. I noticed earlier you mentioned the sort of the idea that maybe Comic-Con, well, you didn't say Comic-Con wouldn't exist, but
I didn't say that, for the record. I really didn't say that.
Thank you.
Okay. No, but I mean, we talk about it a lot here. Is this idea that nowadays, if you have a sold out event, could potentially open up further revenue streams by having it as a VR event as well. I think that's really interesting, and I don't think it's ever going to take over from the actual event. I think Comic-Con will still be around in a few years, and I think it will continue to be great. But I think that what will change is there'll be an extension of that, in that people will be able to view it from their homes, and it'll be a lot better experience than just watching a stream through a laptop or a TV. I think so. So that's the extension of that in terms of events. But in terms of other uses for VR, therapy, uses are fantastic. And I also think real estate is a huge one as well. The ability to view a property in VR or to actually view something that you want to purchase and actually see it and hold it and touch it maybe from the comfort of your own home would be amazing. There's so many opportunities. And sorry, go on.
But I'm curious though, Andrew, from your perspective and the work that you're doing and what you're seeing with these young people, the kind of question that's burning in my mind is this notion that with younger minds, there is a certain degree of plasticity and therefore impressionability, if you like, in the way that they actually consume data and information and how they're learning and the formation, if you like, of their cognitive functions. And whether or not you think that there will be this kind of long-term shift in the way that we do begin to consume data in the same way that mobile phones have had that impact on us. And Google has had that impact on us. If somebody doesn't know something these days, it's not a case of going down to the local library and digging out a book. It's a case of, I'll Google it. Yeah. And I'm just curious whether or not you feel that a technology like this is going to have that kind of an impact as well, whether or not there's going to be this point in the future where actually it's totally normal for us to all be thinking in 3 dimensions and all be manipulating data in 3 dimensions, whether that is planning our personal time in terms of meetings, whether that is, organizing our caseload in terms of, if we're doing work or homework or whatever that thing might be, just shifting that data around and being able to physically pluck it down and reorder these things and connect the dots between the data or even each other in different ways. Do you think this is going to have that kind of impact?
I do. I think it will certainly have an impact similar to this. I think people can suggest that it's going to have a lot bigger impact than it actually will. That people aren't going to be sat 24/7. Well, some people may, with a headset.
I really hope not.
Me too.
Blue sky out there, people. Go see it.
It's one of the things that's always sort of, obviously, with our content platform, we've had over 1,000 apps, and I've always thought it's great because we're getting the content to the masses, but at the same time, I don't want to live in a world where everyone sits at home with a headset on. You know, there will be uses for it. You know, for one example would be you go to work, you put a headset on, and you, as a developer, you would have multiple screens that you'd be able to use to shift around to coding. You know, that would be a great use of it. But you're not going to live your life through the VR. You need to have actual reality as well. And I think that for kids, it's important to make sure the content is safe and actually useful and educational in some cases. There needs to be some sort of filter on that, definitely. That's one of the things we've done with Bogglebox is create a platform for safe, curated content for kids so that we don't run into these problems down the line whereby a child ended up watching, or experiencing a war first person. You've got to be really careful with a technology like this because it's so influential and so immersive that in cases it could cause trauma, and that's the last thing you want because it would just ruin such a great technology that we have.
Absolutely. Well,
you guys are very pro reality. I don't know about you, but I look forward to leaving this miserable plane behind and going to live beside Ethan Carter. That would be fine. The sky in there is way bluer and way nicer than this one.
My 7-year-old son agrees with you.
Okay,
well, getting him to do his homework difficult.
Well, lovely as it is, the notion of this ongoing virtual reality, in real world reality, what it would be lovely to do is to give our listeners a way to be able to find out more about what you're up to and follow what you're up to. And we ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. And I will ask you, James, as the resident expert here, who's been on the show before, to share with us your social media handle of choice.
My Twitter handle is Jimco, J1MCO.
Wonderful, thank you. And Rob, what about you?
If anyone's interested, you can find me on Twitter at Rob Yescombe, which is ROBYES for sugar, COM for magma, B for buttock, E for explosion.
Interesting choice of words. And Trip, what about your good self? What would be your social media handle?
That was incredible.
My Twitter handle is Hunter Trip.
Thank you. And Spencer, what's your social media handle of choice?
At BBC Blue Room.
And I think that was it. No, Andrew. Did I ask you, Andrew?
No, it's at WeAreVR, WEARVR.
I always end up putting an extra A in there somehow. Every time I do it, I always manage to put an extra A in there. Okay,
it's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. But before we let you all go, I am aware that a couple of you might have something that you would like to share with our listeners. I'm going to start with you, James, because I know you have another show coming up soon-ish, a big thing that lots of people will be turning up to. Why don't you share with us the dates and venue for said event?
Well, it's actually this weekend in Frankfurt. We have our ESL 1 Frankfurt event, which is Dota 2. Very exciting. I'm sure there'll be some opportunities to look at VR there as well. And following that will be Cologne. So they're the two big events we've got coming up.
And what's the date for the Cologne event?
I think July 18th, I want to say.
Okay. Just because we probably won't get this out in time for the weekend. So I'm going to
That's a good point. Yeah.
recommend everybody come along to Cologne to have a little exploration and find out more about things. But Trip, I hear that there is big news afoot in terms of your show next year and when tickets might be available.
Yes, our show will be on April 21st, 22nd, and 23rd at the San Jose Convention Center, and tickets will be going on sale at the beginning of July.
So watch this space. Is there a URL that they need to be visiting in order to pick up those tickets?
They can. It is svcomiccon.com.
Okay, and we'll make sure to include that information in the show notes. But in the meantime, we want to thank you all for joining us today. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. And join us on Twitter at DigitalJamLTD.
DigitalJamSessions.com